It was a typical night after my shift as a sales promoter at a supermarket. I found myself alone in the living room, enjoying a scary movie while snacking on popcorn I'd made specifically for the occasion. Everything pointed to another quiet, uneventful Friday night, just the way I preferred it. There wasn't the faintest indication that this would turn into one of the most terrifying nights of my life. I was fully immersed in the incantation when I suddenly began to hear a faint scratching sound at the front door. It wasn't aggressive, rather it was soft and persistent. Initially, I dismissed it as the wind or some other harmless noise, but over time, it grew louder and more insistent. Curiosity eventually got the better of me, and I stood up from the couch, more intrigued than scared. As I reached the door, I hesitated briefly before opening it. Outside, there was nothing but an expanse of darkness. Still, a nagging feeling in my gut told me something wasn't right. I wish I had listened to that instinct, but instead, I ignored it and opened the door wide, finding the street completely empty. I let out a sigh of relief, questioning whether I'd really heard anything at all, or if my mind was simply playing tricks on me, perhaps a result of watching a horror movie. However, just as I was about to shut the door, a low chuckle echoed behind me. I spun around quickly, searching for the source of the laughter, but to my shock, no one was there. A chill ran down my spine, though I tried to rationalize it as a sound from the TV. Convincing myself it was just paranoia, I shut the door and returned to my movie. But the atmosphere had shifted. Every small noise now startled me, and my house suddenly felt larger, emptier, and eerier than ever. I considered switching to a comedy to ease my nerves, but my pride wouldn't let me. I didn't want fear to get the best of me, convinced that it was all in my head. As minutes passed, I tried harder to calm down, but the unease lingered, growing stronger. Suddenly, a new sound caught my attention. I paused the movie and focused intently, straining to identify it. This time, it wasn't my imagination. It was the sound of footsteps, slowly approaching from the hallway outside. The footsteps sounded deliberate and very real. My heart raced as I got up from the couch and cautiously moved toward the front door to see who might be there. When I was just a few feet away, the footsteps stopped abruptly, right on the other side. A tense silence filled the space, leaving me frozen. I waited, expecting the person to knock or say something, but instead I heard a faint whisper. "Can you open the door, please?" The voice was so soft, as if the speaker didn't want anyone else to hear it, just me. I stood motionless, my heart pounding. The door wasn't made of glass, and the windows were too high for anyone to see me. How did they know I was there? Maybe they didn't. But why whisper? My mind raced, considering what to do, but I couldn't bring myself to respond. Just as I was trying to gather the courage to speak, the door began to rattle violently, as if someone was trying to force their way in. I stumbled back instinctively, panic washing over me. The pounding grew louder, echoing through the house, and although I knew the door was secure, I felt utterly vulnerable. Then, as suddenly as it started, the noise stopped. Everything fell eerily silent. I tiptoed closer to the door, peeking through the small upper window, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever was outside. But there was nothing, no one in sight. I thought maybe it was finally over. But just as I started to relax, I heard a creaking sound, slow and deliberate. It was the back door opening. A chill swept through me as I realized my mistake. I'd forgotten to lock it. Feeling foolish and terrified, I knew I had to act quickly. I bolted to my room as quietly as possible, my mind racing. Once inside, I realized I'd made another error. I'd left my phone on the living room couch right by the front door. There was no way I could retrieve it now. Desperate, I crouched down and peeked through the keyhole, hoping it might give me some advantage. Moments later, I heard heavy footsteps ascending the stairs. They were slow and deliberate, as if the intruder already knew exactly where I was. The footsteps stopped directly outside my door. I froze, barely daring to breathe, my eyes still pressed to the keyhole. Then I saw it, an eye staring back at me from the other side. I gasped and fell backward, panic gripping me. I scrambled to the window, throwing it open, but quickly realized jumping would mean serious injury. The concrete below was unforgiving. I had no other option but to stay put, praying the intruder wouldn't break through the door. Suddenly, I heard a soft knock on my bedroom door. The same voice as before spoke, calm yet chilling. "Hello? Can you open up, please?" Summoning what little courage I had, I shouted, "Stay away. I'll call the police." My voice was shaky, but I hoped it sounded firm enough to deter him. The reply came, unnervingly calm. "I just want to come in. Please open up." I backed into a corner, tears streaming down my face as I felt utterly trapped. Minutes passed, each one stretching into eternity as the knocking continued, accompanied by the same chilling plea. "Can you open up? I just want to come in." Then, without warning, the knocking stopped. After what felt like hours, I cautiously approached the door and peered through the deadbolt. The hallway was empty. For a fleeting moment, I considered making a run for it, but something held me back. What if it was a trap? As I debated my next move, a new noise reached my ears, this time from the backyard. My heart sank. I rushed to the window and peered out, my blood running cold. There he was, climbing the side of the house with an agility that seemed almost inhuman. It was the first time I truly saw his face, a young, thin man with disheveled hair and a wild, unsettling look in his eyes. His determination was terrifying. Nothing seemed capable of stopping him. Realizing I had no time to lose, I sprinted out of my room and headed for the front door. As I dashed out onto the porch, I heard him land behind me, his footsteps pounding after me. I screamed for help, running as fast as I could, my desperation fueling me. Finally, I spotted a police cruiser at the corner of my block and ran straight for it, begging the officers for help. The police wasted no time following me back to the house. At first, they thought the intruder had fled, but I insisted they search thoroughly. Finally, they found him, hiding in my closet, waiting for them to leave. He was arrested on the spot. Later at the station, I recounted the nightmare I'd endured. To this day, I don't know what his intentions were, whether he meant to harm me or not, but I'm thankful I never had to find out. That night, I felt true danger like never before, and the thought of what could have happened still haunts me. Hi, I'm Alan. I now reside in a peaceful little town just outside Austin. Honestly, I'm not one to venture out much at night, but when I do, I make it a point to stick to crowded places, avoiding isolation as much as I can. But here's the thing. It wasn't always that way. I used to stay out past midnight regularly, even getting home from work at that hour. People often warned me it was dangerous, but I dismissed their concerns, convinced that nothing would happen to me. And for the most part, I was right. Until that night. It was a cold, dark autumn evening. After a long day at work, I arrived at the bus stop a little later than usual. The area was deserted, with only a dim streetlight casting a weak glow that made the surroundings feel eerie. Still, for me, this was routine. I've always been somewhat wary at that particular stop, but not because of ghosts or anything supernatural. My apprehension stemmed more from the thought that someone might try to rob me since the area had a reputation for petty crime. Yet, that night, everything seemed normal. It was quiet, and I waited for the bus just like any other day. Normally, there are other commuters at the stop, but this time I was completely alone. I figured the bus had just left, and I'd have to wait a bit longer. As I absent-mindedly flipped through an old newspaper I had found on the bench, an unsettling sensation crept over me, a feeling that someone's eyes were on me. At first, I thought it was just my imagination, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It was as though a sixth sense was warning me that something was off. Not wanting to make the situation feel more real, I hesitated to confirm my fears. But eventually, I forced myself to act brave. I looked around, scanning the area for the source of that unnerving stare. I didn't see anyone nearby, so I went back to reading the paper, trying to shake off the discomfort. But as the minutes ticked by, the sensation of being watched only grew stronger. It was becoming unbearable. I glanced up again, and that's when I saw him. Standing under the streetlight was a tall, thin man with an icy expression fixed on me. His gaze was chilling, following my every move with an intensity that sent shivers down my spine. He made no effort to hide the fact that he was watching me, and the haunting look in his eyes seemed to suggest he was enjoying my unease. A shiver ran through me as I stood up, hoping to shake off the discomfort. But as I moved, the man shifted slightly closer, maintaining a careful distance yet never breaking eye contact. I looked across the street and noticed a group of people gathering at another bus stop. Without overthinking it, I decided to cross over, seeking safety in numbers. But no matter where I went, The man seemed to anticipate my every move. He didn't follow me outright, but his gaze never wavered. It was as if he was playing a game that only he understood. The people around me were too engrossed in their phones to notice anything strange, leaving me feeling isolated despite the crowd. I couldn't understand his intentions. Why was he following me? If he wanted to rob me, he had ample opportunity when I was alone earlier. Yet he didn't approach. He just stood there watching, his presence filling me with dread. Hi, my name's Jessica, though everyone calls me Jess. What I'm about to share is, without a doubt, the most insane and terrifying experience of my life, something so horrifying it nearly destroyed me. A few months ago, I installed one of those security cameras that activate whenever someone rings the doorbell or approaches the front door. Living alone, I thought it would serve as a good deterrent for potential burglars or prowlers. Security first, right? But ultimately, it didn't make a difference. It didn't stop my stalker one bit. One night I was relaxing at home, glued to the TV, binge-watching a Keeping Up with the Kardashians marathon. Out of nowhere, I received a notification from the camera. At first, I assumed it was a glitch, maybe a shadow, or the wind triggering the sensor. But when the second alert came through, I got more cautious. Checking my phone, I saw a man standing at my door. He was wearing a hood that obscured his face, but his tense posture was unmistakable. He didn't have any bags or belongings, just stood there, as though waiting for something. Frozen on the couch, I kept wondering who this person was and why they'd come at such a strange hour. I decided against opening the door, logically. Instead, I tried speaking to him through the intercom, but all I got in return was silence. He stood there, unmoving, for several minutes. Then, without warning, as if he'd received some kind of signal, he turned and walked away. It was strange, but I convinced myself he might have been a lost neighbor or someone who'd taken a wrong turn. I had no reason to believe otherwise at the time. Still, I kept my guard up just in case he returned. After some time passed and no sign of him reappeared, I closed the app and did my best to forget about it. But the peace didn't last long. A few hours later, the doorbell rang again. This time I was startled but more prepared. I immediately checked the screen, and sure enough, there he was again, the same hooded figure. But this time, instead of keeping his head down like before, he lifted his face and seemed to stare directly into the camera, as if he was looking straight at me. Startled, I instinctively jerked back, a knot forming in my stomach. I stayed frozen, staring at the screen, hoping he'd turn and leave like the last time. But he didn't. Instead, still locking eyes with the camera, he raised his hand and banged on the door several times, the loud, dry sound echoing through my house. The noise unnerved me even more. Still, I refused to approach the door or speak to him through the intercom. I just wanted him to think no one was home and leave. However, with the TV casting flickering lights, that seemed unlikely. Eventually, seeing I wasn't coming to the door, he turned and left again. Unfortunately, this wasn't the last time I'd see him.